when I was growing up in Ireland, my grandmother had a house that was, built in the 1600s, and I mean, it was just an old house. And so, she would always say, well, if you're going up to the storeroom upstairs, just go in and say what you're going to do to the air, like if it was a ghost or something, and just say, hey, I'm just here to get my stuff. I'm going to leave. So that is one of those things that I was taught from just a very young age. It just, like ghosts are real, and if you just talk to them and tell them what you're doing, then they know that you're just coming into the space and you're going to leave, and everything's fine. So somehow that came to my mind, and I thought, well, this thing or whatever it is looking at me, is mad that we're down here shooting, and probably because it thinks we're going to leave a big mess. And so I said to my wife, I said, we're going to have to clean up, like we always do. Well, it was the first time we'd ever been up there. And it was kind of a funny thing because then the smell kind of went away. And she thought, and she said something had talked to her in her brain, I mean, and this is, like the mind speak, which a lot of people in Sasquatch say that Sasquatches can either speak to you through telepathy or some other thing. And so, it was kind of interesting because after she said that, it kind of went along with my feelings. But so that's how but then I asked her after that too. Then I said, what did you smell? And she described the smell, and I described my smell, and they weren't the same smells. And so
what did she describe, Kevin?
Well, she described it as being more of a musty smell, like you said, whereas what I had smelled was, a feces and a rotten carcass smell. Now, unfortunately, in my life, I've been around dead people, and that have been dead for a while. And so, you get that smell. It's kind of like a burning. If you've ever smelled a burning person or a dead body, that smell is.
I was in Vietnam, and I can I can tell you that depending, they go through a stage where it kind of has a sickening sweet smell to it. And then it gets bad. But what I also said too, Kevin, I said the smell I smelled, it smelled like urine, really strong, with a kind of a musty smell mixed in with it.
Right.
But again, it was to the point where I felt like I wanted to throw up. That's how strong it was.
And the question no, I didn't mean to step on you.
No, and my friend, the doctor, same thing. That's what we talked about it, because it took a while to air out of the car. I mean, that's how pungent it was because we were close to it. So I don't know. Again, I've had people say, like what your wife was saying, that they smelt Bigfoot, but it didn't have that, that horrible, feces type smell, but it had a different type of smell. So I don't know.
Well, and that's the funny thing. I mean, whenever I don't know, Gary, I mean, this is where I become obsessed. This is the point where, at that point in time, you sort of go around and you talk to different people and you just try to get their ideas for it. So because it is interesting that and it's funny with Bigfoot because people will say, well, it's definitely Gigantopithecus or whatever, which, has its own problems with saying it's that. And some other people say, well, it's a relic hominid or some kind of, lost tribe. And different native tribes will say that too, they're big, tall men and they live out in the woods or they're sort of an ape or something else. And so it's a funny thing in America that we've taken the 160 names for Bigfoot, our big hairy creature, and sort of all encapsulated them into Bigfoot, and then had to sort of separate out certain levels of Bigfoot again. So it's you used to be in photography. If you take a big image and you compress it, and then you expand it again, you're not going to get the same definition that you used to have after it's been compressed, even if you try to take it back out through pixelation in Adobe or Photoshop or something like that. And it's almost like that for Bigfoot in a way, because you get to the point where people say, well, the Fog Mountain, the Boggy Creek, the Fog Monster. Sorry, I'm Irish, so some of the words I say come out funny. Fog Monster. They say, well, that's got 3 toes in it. Well, a 3-toed thing is not the same thing as a Bigfoot, but we all call it a Bigfoot. And so people will say, well, maybe that's because, there's a genetic mutation. Well, I would think that if that was true, and I'm not calling these people wrong, but I'm just saying if that was true, there would be, some sort of race of 3-toed people walking around too, because, obviously, but see, that's one of those things where it's very hard to understand that, certain things are the same thing. And that's a very interesting scenario to me that, a lot of these things, I think, do go to the paranormal. I'll make a quick example of that.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
And so whenever I lived in Northern Ireland for a long time, and it's kind of a funny thing. There's a lot of people in Northern Ireland now that are actually doing Bigfoot research in the woods in Ireland, which is funny. But I had a buddy of mine who was a paranormal researcher, and he was really into poltergeists. And he said, I'm going to take you to this place in the middle of this forest, and it's called the Cunian Forest, and it's in Fermanagh. And so I said, well, honestly, brother, I don't know anything about ghost hunting or whatever, from that standpoint, at least from the technical standpoint, because a lot of people say, I can feel a ghost, or it's around me, or these types of things are there. But as far as actually trying to prove that something exists or getting an EVP or whatever, I don't know anything about that really, other than, from an audio standpoint, because I used to do DJ stuff. I know a little bit about audio equipment, but that's about it. So I said, so I'll go out and help you. That's fine. And so we went to this place called the Cunian Cottage, and basically the backstory was that these people lived in this cottage until about the 1920s, and they were driven out of their house by something, and they emigrated to America. And so this place is set off probably 150 yards from the sort of forest road, and you go up this sort of avenue between these trees, and the cottage is set right there. So we started to walk up there. It was getting to be about, it was summertime, so it was fairly late, later than it was here because it's more north. So, it stays light until probably 11 or so before it gets dark. And we went up there, and there's pine cones started coming out of the forest, and stones and all kinds of stuff. And so we got, and he'd said to me before, he said, I'm going to record this the whole time. I don't really want you to talk or react before, I turn all the equipment off, so that we can, that you don't step on the audio. Sometimes you get EVPs and people are talking over the audio, and and I understood what he was trying to say. So I went into the house, and we sat in there for, the best part of a night. And something came up and slapped the back of the house and everything like that. And so in the morning, he kind of gave me the 2 thumbs up. He's going to, we're going to turn this off now and everything. And he said to me, well, Kevin, what did you think of that? He said, that was the best poltergeist example I've ever had. Something came out and there's things thrown out of the woods. And I said, man, if we were in America, I'd swear to God that was a Bigfoot. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of times these things are not, put into a situation where we define them as what we want them to be. So, it's a strange scenario that, a lot of times people, I don't know, are they having if you don't see a Bigfoot and it's not in that, are you having encounter with a Bigfoot, or is it an encounter with a poltergeist? Or see, this is where you get into these different avenues. And so a lot of times whenever people take your reports and you say, I saw these orbs in the forest and I saw Bigfoot, then they say, well, that's baloney. You can't see an orb, so therefore you didn't see a Bigfoot. But it seems to me, and the fact that you said that there was a silver mine by the place that you had your encounter is actually very interesting to me, because it seems to me like mines, like gold mines, silver mines, all these different places seem to have this scenario, this reports of Bigfoot.
Well, caves in general actually do.
Caves, yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do with, well, there's a couple of different ways. There's a couple of different theories I have on that. One is if it was a biological creature and it was a cave, obviously that's natural safety. You'd go in there. The second thing about it is, and what I used to do when I was younger was deal with a lot of different frequency stuff. And because I'd lived in the United Kingdom, and we had sacred stone circles, and Stonehenge was in England, and the Avenue of Karnak is in France. You'd sort of go and you'd measure these stones, because people would say that the stones will hold energy and at certain points of the day release it, or that they have sort of a frequency to the stones. And so if you go to Malta, to some of these underground chambers, the chambers of the beehive, which nobody really understands how they got there or who made them, they resonate a certain frequency, which is 110 hertz. And so the interesting thing about 110 hertz is that it basically stops your language center from functioning, and supposedly expands your visual ability. This is what people say. A lot of people with chakras say there's 432 hertz is the universal healing frequency, and then 110 hertz is this. So, but if you measure these stones, that's it. So, a lot of times you kind of wonder, if you're going from a completely scientific standpoint, that if you go to a lot of these different places that seem to be on ley lines and sort of spirit, what we would call in Ireland thin places, where you'd say, oh, this is the thinning of the veil, where you can travel through the veil from one side to the other. You can see into the middle world. And that's my folklorist standpoint, not my statistical analysis standpoint. But, you've got to look at it from two different things, two different sides, so try to keep everybody happy. But, that is it that what's happening is that you're reacting to the environment, and that's what's causing you to sort of, open up your pineal gland or make DMT excrete. Because, it's an interesting thing about paranormal experiences, that if you've got lots of people who say they take ayahuasca and they've had these sort of out of body experiences, and they can see sort of the next veil and everything like that. Well, if you take somebody and give them synthetic DMT, which your mind naturally makes,
right,
then and you give that to them, and then you hook them up to an MRI and have them tell you the story back. It's interesting because their mind, even if that person is laying in I think that they did this in Dallas or something I think it was in Houston or something, where this person was administering DMT to these people as an experience, but they would have these out-of-body experiences. And so, but then whenever they would come back, obviously their body had never left there, but they would be certain that this had happened to them, And so if you take an MRI of their brain and they have them tell you the story, the same part of the mind lights up as your actual memory. Whereas if you lie and you take an MRI of somebody's brain, if they're not telling the truth, a different section of the brain lights up. So I mean, it's interesting to say. So somebody who's